Our world has changed, and along with it, the basic knowledge and thinking skills required to flourish. How can Iowa's education system keep pace with this change?
This is going to be tough work. We have to do it with a sense of urgency.
We'll look at highlights from the Iowa Summit on Education and explore learning for Iowa's future.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.
Hello and welcome to Learning for Iowa's Future. The global economy has resulted in a focus on developing world-class schools that can deliver quality education. But there's growing concern Iowa students will not be prepared to compete with students from other high-achieving states and countries. Once at or near the top of National Assessment of Education Progress, or NAEP or NAEP, Iowa has, in recent years, dropped in the ranks. Today, Iowa is barely ahead of the national average on reading tests for 4th grade and math tests for 8th grade. As of 2009, 16 states or jurisdictions were significantly higher than Iowa on the 8th grade NAEP math exam. Now in 1992, no state was higher than Iowa. In 2010, data indicates a dramatic shift of students to urban areas. 9% of school districts educated 49% of Iowa students. There's also been an increase in the number of minority students. On the map, the darkest shaded counties show the greatest percentage of increase. Growth in the free and reduced price lunch program, an indicator of poverty, is up by 20% or more for 12 counties. Governor Terry Branstad has made education reform a top priority of his administration, and his office recently held a 2-day summit to explore ways to improve Iowa's education system. Here's a look at some events that led up to the Iowa Education Summit. In July, the governor's office hosted 7 public town hall meetings across the state.
Because we are truly competing in the world economy.
At the Capitol, the governor took part in a series of roundtable discussions.
We have to make sure we're teaching those criteria as well. Connecting what is written with what is taught, with what we test, is at the core of this solution.
U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan and Senator Tom Harkin convened a roundtable discussion on early learning at Carver Community School in Des Moines.
I think this really is a state, federal, and local problem that we have to solve in education. The federal government can't do it all, neither can the state, neither can the local jurisdictions, but all of us together, I think, can really make the reforms and changes that we need to make sure that our kids will grow up to meet the challenges of this new century.
These events all led up to the actual Iowa Education Summit that took place in late July. More than 1,600 attended the summit held at the Iowa Event Center in Des Moines.
Part of the explanation for Iowa's below-average college attainment rate is that Iowa's high schools are falling short of preparing most students to be truly career and college ready.
We'll be looking at more highlights from the Iowa Education Summit throughout the program. But now, let's hear from our program guests. Governor Terry Branstad had intended to be part of our discussion here, but was called away to help deal with the emergency flooding in the Dubuque area. And to give you a sense of the governor's thoughts on education in Iowa, here's a brief excerpt of his address at the Iowa Education Summit.
How can Iowa deliver a world-class education to all students who must be better prepared than ever to succeed in a dynamic, knowledge-based global economy? That is the question that Iowans must answer together.
In the governor's place, Jason Glass is the Director of Education for the state of Iowa, has agreed to join us. Director Glass is a former teacher and brings a variety of experience with education in Colorado, Tennessee, and Ohio. Representative Cindy Winkler from Davenport is a ranking member of the Iowa Legislature's Education Appropriations Subcommittee. She also was a classroom teacher for 19 years. Gary Goldsmith has served 17 years on the school board in Corning. The southwestern Iowa community has seen a decrease in overall population and an increase in students qualifying for the free and reduced lunch program. Amy Prime is a Newton Elementary School teacher. Newton is also challenged with a declining population, a trend that led to the recent consolidation of K-6 classes. And Mary Wysinski is the principal at Kennedy High School in Cedar Rapids, named one of the best high schools in America by U.S. News and World Report. Also here is Clay Jones. He's the chairman and president and chief executive officer of Rockwell Collins Incorporated, based in Cedar Rapids. He serves on the Tippie College of Business Board of Visitors at the University of Iowa and is a member of the Iowa Business Council. So thank you to all 6 of you for joining us. We'll get into this discussion. And Director Glass, I want to start with you. I want to talk about implementing change in the state when we have, like we just talked about, such great diversity from rural to urban and very large to small districts. So how do you implement change?
Well, I think it's first important to point out that Iowa schools are probably better than they have ever been at any time in the past. It's not the case that Iowa schools have gotten worse. The issue is that other states and countries have accelerated past Iowa. So I want to put that out there first, that it is not the case that Iowa schools are worse than they've ever been. But what I think we have to do is challenge the state and the tradition of education here of, do we really want to come together and make this a world-class school system? What does that mean? What steps are we ready to take to do that? So I think that's the challenge that's before Iowa right now.
But it seemed like a couple of the speakers Monday and Tuesday were kind of giving us a pretty bleak, dire picture of our education system. So you're saying to kind of look past that, or was that just an attention getter?
Well, I think it is, the data say what the data say. They are what they are. And it is important that we confront the reality of where Iowa now stands in relation to other states around the country and other countries around the world. But I do think we have to, once we confront that reality of here's where we stand, we have to quickly get to the work of what are we going to do? And don't kids in Iowa really deserve world-class schools? What does that look like, and what steps are we going to take to get there?
All right, Cindy, I'm going to ask you the same question. How do you implement the change?
Well, I think certainly you work with the school districts and the leadership in the school districts, leadership being teachers as leaders as well, to identify the gaps, where the greatest needs are, and put a plan together to strategically address those gaps. Iowa is in a situation where certainly we can look at the NAEP, but the NAEP is less than 10% of our students. And so as we look at that, we need to have other data points as well to look at. There are a lot of things that I heard at this summit that we are already doing, and some of the speakers weren't aware of that. And so some of those best practices, we need to identify those, see what is still working and move forward.
So we are succeeding in some cases.
Absolutely.
All right. Amy, I want to ask you about your district. You know, you're at the, we call it the ground root. I mean, you're in the classroom. How do you implement change in your classroom in your school district?
Well, you have to have good leadership, and they have to know what's going on. And you have to know that every district is different, just like every child is different, every classroom is different, and you have to know that one size does not fit all. A lot of times schools are a reflection of the community and what's going on in the community. So you have to know that, know what's going to work for your area.
All right. Mary, you're not Amy's boss, but you're a principal, and you're the boss of teachers for the most part. How you hear that challenge of good leadership? You agree?
Oh, absolutely. But the leadership has to be a strong leader, you have to empower those who are in the classroom and work together to create the picture you want and create the vision you want for your school.
All right. Now, Gary, from a school board perspective, I mean, you have a lot of interests, or the overall, I guess you call it the high altitude view of things. I mean, how do you take with what you heard from on the ground and in the principal's office on what to do in your school district?
Well, I think I'm from a small school district, and we experience a lot of the same problems that bigger school districts have. Declining enrollment mainly, but we have to rely on our staff and our principals to step forward, our students, and more community involvement in our schools, I think, would help. Parent involvement too. I think that's the key to student learning and getting our test scores up where they need to be.
So who leads the charge to get the community involved? Does that have to be community driven on their own, or does that somebody from the district, and that has to be somebody's job to have a community involvement?
Well, I think, we're all in this together. I think it starts at home, and goes to the staff, administration, school board, business. When you have a small school district, the community a lot of times is really involved in the school, and it's not hard to get them energized and get them involved in student learning. So I think that's an important part in the role that's going to happen here in the state of Iowa as far as increasing test scores and getting to where we want to be.
Amy, it sounded like when we were talking before the program aired about you really have to know, and you just mentioned it when we started, you have to know what the background of the kids is. So does the community involvement come better from the school or from the community in terms of leading that charge?
Well, you know, it has to be both, like you're saying. It can't just be one or it can't just be the other. And I love hearing you guys talk about the teachers being the ones who know what's going on and starting from there, because it's true. I mean, there's so often that these great ideas come from above and sound like they're going to work, but unless you know those kids and those families and what will work with them and what they will respond to, it's not going to fly.
Really?
Really.
Not going to fly. Huh. Never heard that from a teacher before sometimes, you know? It always seems to get a good response. So, Mary, I want to ask you, what is the one thing that you'd like to see happen in your school district, and what is the one thing you need most in your community when we're talking about implementing change?
Well, I would first start to say that I think that we have some very good schools in our state, and I think that there are some very good schools in Cedar Rapids. Two of the high schools in Cedar Rapids are on the list for top 500 in the nation, and we're not there by happenstance. We're there by hard work and by a common vision. And so I'm not sure what we need as much as maybe others need to look at us. And I don't mean that in any arrogant way, just to say I think we've got some things that we're doing there that are really are pretty powerful. And we certainly, in my opinion, have strong community support, and I don't know that we need a lot more money or a lot more this or a lot more that. I think
you're there. You're getting there.
No, we're not there. I just think we're moving forward. We're always working harder to continue to improve, and I think that we've got some. I just think that while the summit talked a good bit about some of the issues that we have, and I think the summit was an outstanding. It was an outstanding beginning. I do think that we could look within the state and see some schools that actually are making things happen and take a look at those and see what they're doing.
All right, Clay, I want to bring you in now because you've heard some of the stuff. You're from the outside of the school, but you're involved with schools. I know Rockwell is. What do you take away from what you've heard here so far?
Well, a couple things. I think I can bring a unique perspective because I'm the only one on the panel who's not a trained educator or has oversight responsibility directly for education. But we certainly need that talent to come into our company to be successful on a world stage. So the first thing I'm hearing is the competition is not the other 49 states. The competition is the rest of the world. And for us to compete, it's not whether our test scores are 5 percentage points or 10 percentage points Illinois or Wisconsin. It's what are we doing against the Chinese? What are we doing against India? What are we doing against Brazil and developing countries? Because those countries read our book. They saw what it took to be a major economic and national power on the world stage, and that is through education. That's what made this country great over the last 150 years. I believe we, in this country, and our state is no exception, has entered a period of complacency, where because we've done it that way for 150 years and it worked for us, we think it'll be working for us in the future. And I'm here to tell you that's not the case. And for us to talk about local control or not local control, or teacher performance or not teacher performance, or teacher pay as a panacea, is we're heading down the wrong street. We have to examine everything about our education system and look at what it's going to take to bring the skills to the marketplace to be competitive over the next 30 to 50 years. And what I would say today is there is abundant evidence that this country is not doing that. And so change, which is what you brought up, is what this is all about. And how much change we're going to buy off and how much we can tolerate, I think, is the thing we as a country need, we as a state need, and I know our company needs that if we're going to be successful, and we're going to go find that somewhere.
You're a worldwide company. You've got worldwide perspective on things. So your business specifically, how do you, I mean, I know you're involved in some school districts across the state, virtual reality and things like that, but a business, every business in every community, tell them why they should be involved in the school.
Well, every business relies on those schools as the future workforce, no matter what they do at what skill level. What I would say is the higher skill level that's required, the more they should be engaged, because there's just a natural grouping of people as they matriculate through the education system. If you want the smartest kids that are the best and brightest, they're going to be the knowledge workers, that's what you're going to need. So every company is going to require that future workforce. And so working in partnership with the schools and the school systems to first make them understand what skills you need, and two, to help them develop those skills. I think there's a big role that business has to play.
All right, you've talked a little bit about, it's like you've peeked ahead on what we're going to do, because I want to take a look at a story about two world-class schools. Now, this segment first aired on IPTV's The Iowa Journal back in 2009, and it features footage from the Des Moines Register's visit to top-ranked schools in both Finland and Canada. In recent years, teenagers in the small northern European country of Finland have topped the international charts in math, science, and reading.
We don't think we're better than anyone else, but we just think that we're just like any other student in any other country.
Three characteristics of the Finnish education system stand out: careful selection of teachers, a rigorous national curriculum, and a constant commitment to provide help if students begin to stumble. The process to enter the teaching profession is highly selective. Fewer than 10% of the applicants for the classroom teacher education program at the University of Helsinki were accepted this school year. All classroom teachers must earn a master's degree. Teachers in Finland say their work is satisfying despite pay that is lower than other affluent nations, including the U.S.
Teachers are respected. They are very sort of decent people, and they're doing something that's very important.
Since all the teachers have master's degree, they are given, more things to decide for themselves. Of course, there's the curriculum that has to be followed, but there's quite a lot of room for improvisation and choices.
A national curriculum sets clear learning goals in core subjects, as well as religion, ethics, music, and others. The system provides support for students who struggle, including special teachers that float between classrooms. Extra pay is given to teachers who provide lessons after school. Schools in Canada also ranked well on international tests. The Des Moines Register visited the western province of Alberta in October of 2008.
Per trial, and you use about 3
The Register found a detailed centralized curriculum, well-paid teachers with access to professional development, a system that embraces multiculturalism, and an ethic of continuous improvement.
There's definitely a focus that we want to be competitive in the world, and we want to be at the same level, if not better, than other places.
Alberta's detailed curriculum promotes consistent educational goals for all students. There is little difference in test scores between schools, and relatively few children performing at the lowest levels. Teachers are involved in all aspects of developing and assessing the curriculum.
I like the new math curriculum in that we're no longer just giving the information to the kids and they're just spewing it forth, back out. They have to come up with the concepts on their own. I think we're making them think more.
Alberta teachers are paid relatively well. On the average, they make more than their peers in Finland and in the U.S. Unlike Finland, Alberta teachers are not required to have a master's degree. The system aims to encourage multiculturalism with an eye towards preparing students for 21st century jobs.
I don't think we are anymore a little province in a little country. I think globalization is inevitable just with the technology and everything else that we have.
Alberta schools also face challenges, including dropout rates. Only about 80% of students finish high school within 5 years of entering grade 10. Class sizes are often too large, and the system does not offer universal all-day kindergarten. However, there is an ethic of being forthcoming about weaknesses, as well as strengths, and a commitment to continuous improvement. All right, we heard a little bit about challenges in communities, and I want to ask two of the folks on the ground. Gary, what challenges do your teachers face in your school district?
Well, our teachers' staff development's big. I mean, we've sunk a lot of money in staff development. We plan on adding more staff development. We rely heavily, in a small district, we rely heavily on our AEAs to come in and help us. And also we partner with our community colleges and our universities. I think that's been important in helping our staff get what they need. It's hard when you have a limited amount of time. It's hard to get this staff development in and get what we need to get out of it.
And to get, I mean, who do you bring in? I mean, you talked about AEA in colleges. Is that who you have to rely on? Or, I mean, you're sharing a superintendent between 2 districts, are you not?
Yes, we are. We're sharing a superintendent. We're also sharing a transportation director and a maintenance director.
So we know that finances are tough too, not just time. And then that's always a constant challenge for you, I would imagine.
Yes, it is. But, you know, as a board, we've decided that staff development is really important. And to get teachers involved in teaching and to get their ideas about what they need to do to improve teaching, that's where we want to be in the Corning District, and we've spent a lot of time trying to develop that.
Amy, do you thoughts when you hear a school board member saying those types of things? Is that what you like to hear?
Well, I mean, time, we've talked about a lot. You need more time to get ready. You need more time. I like how you're hearing teachers as professionals, because I think so often with staff development and in-services, things get thrown at you. All you elementary teachers come sit in this room and we're going to have this staff development. Well, you know, just like the kids in our classroom don't all need the exact same thing, neither do all the teachers. We should be trusted as professionals to be able to sit down and look at our own teaching and say, here are my deficits, here is what I would like to strengthen. Get together with the other teachers in the district who have the same needs, and then find your experts, your AEA, or your people from outside, or your people from within your district. It doesn't even have to cost money. There are plenty of people within our own districts who could be those experts, who could do a book study with us that we could strengthen whatever area it is that we need. So I think we need to look at creative ways and trust our teachers to know and be professional to know what they need to do.
I think the time on staff development was something that certainly came up in the summit, and I remember the comment that they talked about the fact that we needed, on any particular topic, a teacher needed at least 50 hours of professional development in that particular area, and then on top of that, there should be 10 hours a week for teachers to work in collaborative peer coaching opportunities and 10 additional days a year. By doing those kinds of things, we might very well have then the wherewithal to look at that test data, know how to target instruction, know how to improve instruction when, in fact, there are deficits, and move forward. But we don't invest in our professional development.
I think that people think that if we are not in front of kids, we're not working, which is absolutely ridiculous. I always think of it as like a restaurant where the kids are the consumers in the restaurant. And, you know, it's great how the waiter brings it out and how it's presented to you. But the real work was in the kitchen beforehand. And how good it is depends on how much time you spent in the kitchen. Do we want to give our kids fast food or gourmet, you know?
Well, and if you're looking from up above to say, oh, well, they've got 3 planning periods, they don't need that, or 2, or whatever, they only need 1, well, there goes your development time or any preparation time.
Right, it's hard, it's hard.
Yeah.
You know, in Newton, we have we're on a cycle schedule, so we had once a cycle to collaborate with our team members. And of course, during that time, then we had no personal time to work, you know, with our own things that we needed to get done for our own children. I mean, you give and take and you use whatever you've got, and it's not much. It would be nice to have more.
All right. Well, Finnish education expert Pasi Sahlberg shared this thought in his presentation at the Iowa Education Summit on a similar topic.
Globally, there's a lot of talk about accountability. In many places, this accountability is organized through tests, so that teachers and schools are held accountable for students' learning. Finnish language doesn't actually have term accountability. So we don't have any accountability. We talk about responsibility within the school, where teachers are responsible for themselves and the principal and parents and students of what they do.
Jason, I'll ask you this question. What's the difference between accountability and trust?
Well, I think it's trust but verify is the underlying idea behind the principle of accountability. And I think when we look at these other international systems that are accelerating and leading the world, the key word with them is system. They operate as a system, and the things that we've looked at with Alberta and Finland, the 2 countries you mentioned, but also Singapore, South Korea, some of these other countries that have really accelerated to the front, they operate as a system. They put a great deal of emphasis on teacher quality, the ability of teachers to work together, and the accountability element is something that's in the United States very strongly, but also in some other countries, South Korea and Singapore, to mention a couple. I think we have to push away from this idea that we're going to completely abolish any standardized testing or accountability. I think it's just a fantasy. But what we should be getting to is how do we use assessments in more meaningful, more reliable, provide data in more accessible, faster ways that really help with instruction. So while I think it's a fantasy to think that we're going to completely abolish accountability, we certainly should be engaged in the work of how we do this better.
I think one of the things when you talk about this system, education is certainly a system, but there are many other systems that impact education. And Pasia also mentioned that their system has access to health care for all of their citizens, that their system does not have an unemployment issue at all, that there is not any homelessness because the government takes responsibility when things happen beyond an individual's control. Their system also is a situation where those teachers, high rigor in selecting the teachers, their education is paid for, so there's no student debt. And while they are going to school, they have a stipend that they receive. So there are a lot of other systems that are supporting education. And if we look at the education system in isolation, we're missing some other key factors in preparing students, getting them ready to learn.
Clay, when you look at that world perspective, we talked a little bit about the student, but I mean, the trust and accountability issue, I mean, do we look, if they looked at our book, do we look at their books now on how they're doing it, like what Cindy's talking about?
Well, yeah, first let me say something about the world. I think Finland has some great ideas for education, but you look at Europe. Europe is not the economic power it once was, and it's in terrible shape, not unlike this country in terms of its debt and its ability to fund what it's doing. When you compare the production of knowledge workers in the United States, we produce about 60,000 engineers a year. By the way, it's important to us because we have about 8,000 in our company of 20,000 people. China produces 600,000, India about 400,000. Now, albeit you can argue they're not as good as ours, but if only 20% of their engineers are as good as ours, that's 3 times as many engineers as we produce. And those are the people that will be creating the companies and the wealth that will allow them to be a player on the economic stage. So it's quality of life, it's vitality of the economy that then enables those systems to prosper. So it begins with that educational component and where we're putting our education dollars to create the kind of knowledge workers we need.
Now, Rockwell, if I remember correctly, has been on the ground. Was it East Marshall? Was that the first virtual reality system? Tell me a little bit about the background about how that works and what was the intent of Rockwell's involvement there.
Well, to understand virtual reality or U.S. robotics or future cities or national rocket competition, which are all hands-on areas that we're involved in that sponsor, you have to understand what we believe our role is. We are not educators. We don't know best how to work in the classroom, but we believe our role is to supplement that which is learned in the classroom with hands-on experience. And virtual reality is an example of a hands-on experience that appeals to the kids in a way that is equal to the world in which they live. Today's world is different than when I had an education, and so the stimulus and the kind of learning you get outside the classroom is all via electronic media and sensory stimulation. It makes concepts come alive, and that's what virtual reality does. It allows them to learn the concepts of math in a hands-on environment, to see how it works in a 3D, just as building a Lego League robot does for a 5th grader, or a national robot for a high school kid. And so that's where we're involved in giving kids hands-on experience to get them excited and engaged about math. There's not much about an equation that appeals to a student to really get them jazzed up and go home. Guess what I learned today, Mom? I learned an equation. But if you say, I built a robot and I used that equation to do something, now all of a sudden it has purpose. And that's where I think the partnership between business and education can explore ways to get the kids excited about what they learn.
So, Mary, how do the kids at Kennedy High School get excited about building a robot and not just, oh, I learned algebra today?
Well, I think a lot of it is dependent upon teachers to bring that reality into the classroom. When I just this spring, I was watching one of our teachers in an advanced pre-calc class do this just all the way around the room equation that he was trying to teach him, and then he said, "Okay, let's make this real world." And just created real world right there with the students. It was just, it's fabulous. You have to depend upon teachers to know how to bring it, to make it relevant and real to kids. And they have to work with people to figure that out if they don't know it. They need to know it, though.
All right, I need to talk about the redefining role of the school principal, like what Mary is one of the initiatives explored by an Eastern Iowa school that we visited back on the Iowa Journal program. This story first aired in 2009.
3 years ago, we were presented a program known as the SAM program, School Administrative Manager. And when we looked at the program, we thought, you know, we're really doing many of the things that program is all about in terms of the goal is to make the principal the instructional leader in the school.
The first step in the SAMS program was a week-long evaluation of Principal Fox to assess how he used his time. Given that Fox was already beginning to focus on becoming the school's instructional leader, the results of his evaluation were surprising.
My data was not very good. I was about 18% instructional that week, and about a little over 80% of my time was in management things.
Over the past 3 years, that data has changed dramatically.
At the end of last year, I was clearly 50% of my day was instructional. And then some days, there were days when I was probably 75% of my day was instructional, but there are other days when, things happen and maybe only 30% of my day was instructional.
Training for the SAMS program is provided by the Iowa Department of Education. However, the school district is responsible for providing someone to handle the managerial tasks.
We really took the staff that we had in place, so the resources really were not additional, but the type of work and trying to focus the work, I think, is the benefit that we gained from going through the training with the School Administrative Manager project. The hypothesis is that it frees up that time of the building principal to truly be observing instruction, helping team teach, having feedback with teachers, helping them reflect on their practice, and that's what we're striving for.
With more time to devote to instructional leadership, Principal Fox can help implement the educational strategies the district has set for itself.
When we look at the students that we've actually had in the system for at least a year, we see a very steady trend line of improvement in reading, mathematics, and science across our entire district.
Now, we contacted Brad Fox, the principal at Clear Creek Amana, for an update on the school SAM program. He told us that they have lost their outside funding for the program, but he continues to act as an instructional leader in his school. And I want to pose the first question to Representative Winkler. Appropriations, that's doling out the money. A lot of people. You had some tough decisions. What were some of those factors in leading into decisions that were made and where funding was going and trying to weigh giving districts money and balancing the budget?
Well, it's an interesting question because there was a lot of conversation about the fact that we didn't have money. And in fact, the revenue estimate gave us pretty good data that identified that we had more money than we had the previous year. What we ended up doing after the governor had recommended that money for the Iowa Corps, as an example, go away, that the professional development component in the Department of Education not be funded. We actually negotiated additional funding at the end of the day. Those dollars go to the development of the program so the system works. Each individual school district does have revenue for professional development from our allowable growth, but our allowable growth was then set at 0%. So 3/4 of our school district are now, for this next school year, on budget guarantee in an unnecessary way. We left approximately $300 million of money that we could appropriate on the table and didn't put it out to our schools. So this is not necessarily the time to talk about how we had to struggle. The dollars were there. The choices to spend those dollars on education weren't.
With the governor originally to be here, the first question was going to be to him on this subject, but I'll ask you, do you feel that maybe this zero allowable growth for a year is more of a placeholder to figure out where the best place to put money will be next year after, say, an education summit or a continued discussion with a new governor comes in? Do you feel that there'll be a bigger increase next year?
Well, I'd like to think so, and I think that's one of the most important questions that we ask as we talk about what it is we need to do to improve student achievement or to give children more hands-on opportunities in Iowa, to connect them to the real world, to prepare them for the global competition that they will be a part of. How much are we willing to spend? I think that is a key question to ask, because if there is not an amount that we're willing to spend, that the funding will remain status quo, it's a disservice to go through the process. I have every hope that we will move forward and we will fund programs that we know will make a difference in the lives of our children.
There was a discussion about money at the Education Summit. Let's hear now from David Driscoll, chair of the National Assessment Governing Board and former Massachusetts Education Commissioner. He spoke on how Massachusetts became the top education state and the next steps for the U.S. to become globally competitive.
The government was going to give to schools the tools that they needed. And sorry to say this, Governor, that included money. We had money. Well, I'm sorry, because we had money in those days. The governor doesn't have money.
All right, Jason, you had a front row seat for a lot of this. I mean, your thoughts, you kept hearing that money, and it certainly got a big applause. What'd your boss think?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to point out some of the facts about this scenario, the scenario we find ourselves in now. The truth is we are spending more in education than we did the previous year. That's a fact. And we are increasing spending the next year by 2%. What we have to do is, as educators, I think, is to stop making the argument, give us more money and let us keep doing the same things. I think the governor, myself certainly, are committed to increasing spending to education, increasing funding to education, and thinking about how we move the system forward. But we're not interested in spending it in the same ways we always have. I think what we have to do is make a plan, come together on what are the steps that we're going to take to really make Iowa an education system, not a program, not an episodic event, but a system that is on par with the highest performing systems in the world. And then I think we can make an argument for why we should increase spending.
Well, I asked you the same question I did to Cindy. So is this more of a placeholder for this season to get you on the ground 7 months into the job, the governor back on the ground from in the job he used to be, and we might see a different increase next year and more targeted funding, which you think would make a difference in schools?
Sure, I think there's a process that we have to go through, and this is part of it. These discussions around the state are part of that process, but making that plan, deciding where we want to allocate new resources, but also I think we have to look critically at the funds that we have in the system already, and are we using those smartly? Are we using them strategically in ways that are lined up with what we'd actually like to have schools accomplish? I think you have to look at both. We have to think about, are we using the money that we have in the system in smart ways, and where do we strategically apply new funds to really move us forward?
All right.
Can I just say?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's great that you're taking your time, because I think too many times people just, especially in education, anybody who's ever been a teacher knows that there's, you jump on the bandwagon of something new and expect it to fix things. So I'm glad that they're taking the time. But we're talking about 0% growth, and in the meantime, you're talking about placeholders. In the meantime, I've got 25 kids in my room, So you take your time to make the plan, but we still have teachers who need paid and kids who need to go on field trips and who need resources to be able to continue. I mean, they're growing, so we still need the money while we're still trying to decide. So,
how are you impacted when you hear the discussions from the school board and the superintendent, the community hearings of we're going to have to consolidate a building? How does that affect your focus on trying to do your job?
Well, it was devastating in Newton. It still is. There's a lot. We closed a building last year, and it was heartbreaking. It was actually the building I taught at, so that made it worse for me personally. But we lost not only a building. We lost reading teachers and we lost specials teachers this year. It was the first time in forever, this coming up year, that they cut orchestra, so my daughter doesn't get to play her violin anymore. I mean, it affects each child in their own way, where, like I said, I had never, until this 2 years ago, had a full class of 25 kids in my early childhood classes before. It had always been, 19, 20, and every child makes a difference. But even personally, I teach second grade, and at the last year, they decided to, one second grade teacher left, they decided just not to replace her. So all the second grade teachers in the district got extra kids in our classes. I mean, it makes a big difference to every kid and every teacher in every building.
Gary, as a school board member for years, several years, what has been the toughest years in trying to deal with these budgets? And you have an open, the Director of Education next to you in the audience. What do you tell? Give me help.
Well, you know, funding has been a big thing in small districts. The budget guarantee is going away in 2014. And for small districts, the clock's ticking on them. I think that the state needs to give more incentives to reorganize or whole grade share because we've cut about everything we can. And when we have to start cutting curriculum, that starts hurting kids. And when you do that, then that involves their future, and we don't want to do that. And that's why I wondered if the state had thought of anything to incentives for reorganization or whole grade sharing, or where are we going to be after the budget guarantee goes away?
Sure. Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, and that how we think about the impact on small districts is critical. We have to stop enabling the continuing practice of schools ignoring the fact that their communities are shrinking. So we have to stop the enabling, and also I think you're right, get to some incentives around how we ask people to come together. This is, but I think an important point is this is much less a financial or an accounting consideration as it is an emotional consideration. Consolidating a school, closing a school, bringing communities together is extremely emotional. So that's a part of this process that I think we have to attend to as well.
Mary, I think you were wanting to chime in there.
Two stories. One, not many years ago, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, the Cedar Rapids district, the Linn-Mar district, the Marion district, and the Prairie district, all in that area needed superintendents. And had we joined together collectively, those 4 districts together then, we would not have been as large as we were, as Cedar Rapids was alone in 1970. And the larger districts were pretty good at telling the little districts they should consolidate, but we could have as well had we wanted to. I don't know if bigger is better. I think it's more, there can be some more efficient, maybe it's not more effective. On the other hand, my husband and I were just in western Iowa a couple of weeks ago visiting some of his family, and the school where he graduated 19 kids this year. 19 now, and they're really excited because next year they're really big. They have 25. That's crazy, I think, but and maybe you can provide them a solid education. Kennedy High School has 27 advanced placement programs. We provide our kids with incredible opportunities to get to the very best colleges in the country, to get the very best education in high school that they can get. I don't think that little town in Iowa that graduated 19 children can do that. I don't know if they come together with another school district that they can do it either. I mean, there has to be, you know, the initiative from the Bell and Blank Center to provide AP online and through the ICN and things like that need to come to play. I just find it fascinating.
But this is the catharsis of change that we're talking about, and we'll never get to where we want to go unless we deal with this. So, Mary, we have 4 superintendents within a 15-minute drive of any school. Does Cedar Rapids need 4 superintendents? No, it doesn't.
We had like 5, 6, 8 years ago the opportunity to have one, and we're not going to do that because.
But it's all about local control.
It's all about local control.
But
it's all about. That's where I went to high school.
What
50
color is
years
your
ago,
football uniform? I don't know.
We
Our
have this rivalry we have to put up with, and that is written all over the state of Iowa, especially as we see this big transition from rural to urban areas, even within our small state. Sure. And until we get past that emotional tug, we will not make progress in the state. We will argue about the money that you're not getting to teach your school because it's being distributed in very inefficient ways. If we ran businesses the way we ran our school system, we'd be bankrupt in the state. That's not the way you do it to be successful in a world stage in competition.
So we can't
have to think about that in the way that we structure our school system in the state, or we'll be left behind, and these statistics that Jason talked about will only get worse.
Well, and I think that we could look at the way in which we talk about education and broaden that conversation and talk about it as a sense of the community and redefining potentially the sense of community. In many of those small districts, they go one direction for their health care. They go another direction for their dental care. They might go another direction for the grocery store. And if, in fact, we start talking about what community means and what structures need to be in place for communities and start growing, thinking about growing, gaining some synergy in particular areas and bringing businesses together as a part of the mix, then the change isn't so hard because what they have is better than what they have now.
But if I'm in Lost Nation or Elkader
Sure.
or Potawatomi County, I don't want to give my control up to somebody to make my healthcare decision or where that's going to go. But they're going to have to get past that, is
So
what
then
you're
you
saying.
go back to what Jason said and what we heard at the summit. And there's, I don't know. I'm all about local control. I want to do what I want to do. And the superintendent, I can discuss what I'm going to do, but I don't really want somebody telling me what I'm going to do. And on the other hand, we need a national agenda. We need a national focus. We need at least a state focus. We need to decide, do we teach algebra? And if we do, what does it look like? And does it look the same everywhere, or does it look different depending on who's teaching it and how you're teaching it and what you're teaching? We need to give up the local, or we're going to be locally controlling nothing because we're not going to have anything to offer.
So, Jason, how do you answer Mary's question?
She's absolutely right. We have a system of schools. We don't have a school system.
Right.
And so we have to think about, where does this state come together? We look at the patterns that we see in the highest performing school systems in the world. They have a clear curriculum that they hyper-focus on. They think about how they unpack that and how they teach to it. They're very focused on the teaching profession, how they improve it, how they support it. So those two major areas, I think, for Iowa are where we have to, that's where we have to make our stand. Another thing Iowa has to take on is, I think, how we weave innovation into this process. For too long, this state has said, we'll wait it out, let's let this too shall pass, when the state should have been saying, let's try some things. Some of it may not work, but let's try some things and let's engage in a process of continuous learning. That's also what we learned from the highest performing systems in the world.
Well, and I think we started on the path mid-2000s in regard to the Iowa Core, and then the alignment of our Iowa Core and what we did, the work we did then, with the Common Core. So the conversations about what it is that we want kids to know, understand, and be able to do, we've had a lot of those conversations already. We just are in the implementation stage, and there are not assessments developed to measure whether or not the kids know what it is we've identified as very important for that global competition conversation. So we are right there. We need to continue along those lines, still making sure that what we had in mind in literacy and in math and the Common Core gets assessed through the Common Core assessment, and then move forward with our social studies and our science and our 21st century skills and implement that. But that core was just as much about instruction and opportunities for the real world as it was for what it is you teach. It's what and how you teach. So more technology, more innovation, more business partnerships. The real world applications are in those businesses. The teachers might not know until they have that relationship. They might not know what the real world application is in some of the more sophisticated processes.
Well, one thing I need to get to is talk a little bit more about the student here. And former Governor of North Carolina James Hunt Jr. spoke at the Iowa Education Summit. During the Democrats' 16 years in office, he established a kindergarten program in his state.
We need to focus on three big things with those early years: parenting skills. Second, high-quality centers or caregivers. And third, dealing with health issues. And what we're shooting for is to have every child, when they first go to school that first day to public school or private school, be healthy and ready to learn.
Amy being ready to learn. Those kids, when you've had preschoolers, I've had a preschooler, they're ready. I feel they're ready to learn, but are they?
They are. They need to be, and they want to be. You know, we've talked a lot about preschool. I know it came up at the summit a lot, and this past year a lot. And there's debate on whether it's important or not. And it is so important, especially to those of us who see children come into school who have not had it. And so you can say it doesn't matter, but we know it does, because we know the families. Those of us who are doing the work, we know the families, and we know what some of those children are doing or are not doing when they're in the homes. I mean, and it's not even just preschool. It's as they get older, you know, second grade too. We get tearful at the end of the year, sometimes not because we'll miss them, but because we know what they're going home to for a full summer at their home or wherever they'll be.
So Jason, do we need to make, I'm not going to say year-round school, but how do we extend that where we don't have to have tearful goodbyes like that, because we know there's a better end for them on
well, I'd
the
like
other
to pick
side.
up on that early childhood discussion just a minute. Amy's right. The evidence on early childhood education is clear. It makes an impact. It makes a difference. The question when you implement a quality early child care program, early childhood education program, always is, do you go universal? Do you target the funds to the kids that have the biggest need? Iowa's gone in the direction of a universal approach. The governor yesterday signed, I think, the budget bill that guaranteed that program for at least the next 2 years, if not longer. I think we're ready to move on past this debate and get towards the larger system issues.
Yeah,
That's great to hear.
That's good to hear. I was going to ask if you like that. But that was that a frustrating debate for some?
Well, we knew it was working. And so when in fact you have a quality program that gives any voluntary, but gives any 4-year-old the opportunity to attend a high-quality program with certified teachers, with a quality curriculum. And we know that we have the assessment with the kindergarten literacy assessment. We know that it made a difference. We have 3 years of data that show that those students who had the preschool opportunity did better on being able to identify beginning sounds than those kids who did not have the preschool opportunity. 3 years of data. Those children now will be entering 3rd grade. The very first year of our preschool students will be entering 3rd grade. We'll have another data point in the ITBS.
Gary, how do you get them ready to go, ready to learn where you're at, and how do you continue to make it better?
Well, we've implemented a preschool in our elementary, and I think it's been great because we haven't been doing a very good job preparing our kids when they come into kindergarten. We've also implemented a pre-K this year, be our first year. We saw some of the kids that weren't quite ready for kindergarten, coming out of preschool, weren't quite ready for kindergarten, so we implemented pre-K. I think, you know, we've tried to stress reading. We try to get these kids started reading. That's been our big push in our elementary, and our Corning board feels that's the key. So I think that the preschool part is very important, and when we've come to the decision, well, no matter what funding is going to happen, we're going to continue to keep it, no matter what we have to do. So how do we get them prepared? I think preschools, I think we get qualified teachers in there, in their preschools, certified teachers that we've got. We have a curriculum that coincides with our elementary education, our kindergarten. When they come in, they're ready to go, they're ready to read, they're ready to learn. And I think that's what it's going to take. And I think it's going to take a few years to see the benefits of that. But I think if we can stay with that, I think definitely we'll see that in the schools in Iowa.
I just have to say too, you know, we've talked a lot about curriculum and ready to read and letter sounds and all that's important, but as an early childhood educator, I have to say it's important that they are just at their developmental level, that they are with other kids and just, I don't want us to forget play and socialization. Absolutely. And you know, some of those things are really just things those kids have never gotten at home, just to be able to be in a play group, or even just to know that school is a place where they're safe and that's fun to be, and to get them excited to learn, whether they're learning the things we want them to learn yet or not. I just think it's important that we know that they're there in a healthy, safe place where they can be excited about learning.
All right. I want to get this in quickly. Sarah Brown Wesleyan was the 2010 National Teacher of the Year. She was from Johnson High School in Johnston, and she had a couple of thoughts at the Iowa Ed Summit.
Do our actions coincide with what we say we value. And I think that's what we need to talk about tonight. That's what we need to think about. And that's what we need to make sure that our conversations that happen as a result of this summit really focus on. The difference between what we say we want and the actions we take to support those very values.
All right, Clay, I want to start with you. Give me something in 1 year that the business community can do to help Iowa schools.
I say expand the hands-on programs we already have established in the state. US First has 2 levels, one for high school, one for middle school, for national robotics competitions. We have the virtual reality. We have several other hands-on things, and this is something we can partner with the schools to do to give them that extracurricular opportunity to apply math and science skills. I don't think there's anything we could do be more important than that.
Mary, same question. What are we going to do in a year?
At the high school level, I think we have to continue to provide rigorous educational opportunities for students. And I'm not convinced the Iowa Core is rigorous enough. I don't know about the Common Core. I know that when we evaluated the Iowa Core in our district, we were going to be going downhill, not uphill. And it's got to be rigorous academic opportunities for every single student, whatever their color, whatever their economic ability.
Amy, same question.
We need to look at what those other countries were doing as far as teacher training and accepting teachers who are of the highest quality and making sure that we are providing for them what they need to be the best teachers.
Gary, give me something that's going to be done in the next year.
I think we need to look at are our tests that we're giving now, are they antiquated? And I think we need to look at how we handle a school day. Do we increase the hours of school day? Do we increase the days in the year in school to give kids more education, to get them better prepared at the secondary level for going on in the future, college, careers, whatever? Now, I think we're at the point where in Iowa, we need to take a look at the length of days and the length of the years.
Okay. Cindy, one thing next year, what are we going to do?
I think that it's important to have the conversations that we need to have about education and where we want to go and what the expectations are. Come together. This absolutely should not be a partisan issue. We need to make those decisions in the best interest of the children in Iowa and the families in Iowa, and I think we can do it.
All right, Jason, you get 20 seconds to make the rubber meet the road.
Sure. Well, I agree with everything that's been said here in this last round. But it's important that this is not just a year. All right, the highest performing systems in the world took decades to get where they are. And so Iowa not only has to start taking steps immediately, but we better buckle down for a long haul and a sustained effort to improve schools.
But they want that first step taken real strong and real fast.
And let's do it.
All right. Thank you so very much. That's Jason Glass, the director of the Iowa Department of Education. And I guess we're not talking public speaking here, but thanks to him. Also, Gary Goldsmith from the Corning School Board, Mary Wilsinski, principal at Cedar Rapids Kennedy. Thank you so very much for the three of you. And on the other side of the table is Representative Cindy Winkler from Davenport, Amy Prime from Newton, and also Clay Jones, Chairman and President and CEO of Rockwell Collins. Thank you so very much for you being here. And if you'd like to review some or all of this program, visit iptv.org. Or if you'd like to watch full-length presentations of many of the Iowa Education Summit speakers that we highlighted tonight, you can visit the program at iptv.org/education. My name is Paul Yeager. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation. Generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa Public Television.